debt. You swiped it without thinking. The number on the screen meant nothing, because numbers on screens never do. It wasn't real. It was a tap, a click, a signature on a digital line, and then suddenly you owned something you couldn't afford. Something you would still be paying for 18 months from now, while the dopamine of that purchase had already decayed into nothing. That is exactly how consumer debt is engineered to work. Not as a financial tool, as a trap. A trap with a rewards program, a customer service line, and a minimum payment structure designed by an army of mathematicians whose single job was to extract the maximum possible wealth from your behavioral patterns without ever triggering your survival instincts loud enough for you to stop swiping. Credit card debt is not a moral failure, it is a cognitive exploit. The formal behavioral economics term is present bias, one of the most studied and most ruthlessly commercialized quirks in human psychology. Present bias is the brain's hardwired tendency to overvalue what is available right now and catastrophically discount what will be required in the future. A landmark study in the American Economic Review found that consumers underestimate their future credit card debt by as much as 40% at the point of purchase. Not 10%, 40%. When you see something you want, the nucleus accumbens in your brain's limbic system fires a burst of dopamine. That dopamine doesn't make you feel happy. It makes you feel the anticipation of being happy. The wanting is its own neurological reward, completely separate from the having. Paying with cash physically activates the insular cortex, the region associated with pain and loss aversion. Brain imaging studies have literally observed that paying cash hurts. Credit cards suppress that insular activation entirely. The pain signal never fires. You are purchasing the want, flooding your brain with anticipatory dopamine, and simultaneously muting the neural circuit that would otherwise signal that something is being taken from you. The credit card company is not just loaning you money. They are performing surgery on your threat detection system, and they charge you 22% annually for the procedure. Before the normalization of consumer credit in the mid-20th century, the average household carried almost no revolving debt. The credit card was originally designed as a convenience tool for business travelers, never for the mass consumer market. Within 2 decades of mass adoption, household debt had become a structural pillar of the economy, so deeply embedded that policymakers began referring to debt-fueled consumer spending as a feature rather than a warning sign. Americans now collectively carry over $1 trillion in credit card debt alone. Every month a balance carries forward at high interest is a month the bank collects what could have been your retirement contribution, your emergency fund, your exit from a job you hate. Debt is patient. It doesn't need you to make a catastrophic mistake. It just needs you to keep making the same ordinary one, month after month, paying the minimum, letting the interest compound while life keeps moving forward, and the math quietly works against you. Debt is the trap that doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like a normal Tuesday. You cannot escape a cage you do not know you are standing in. The grind. You wake up at 6. You log on. You perform. You are exhausted by noon and empty by 9 in the evening. And you do it again tomorrow, because somewhere along the line, someone convinced you that this is how progress is supposed to feel. That the discomfort is evidence you are winning. That the person who sleeps less, answers emails faster, and sacrifices more weekends is ahead of everyone else in a race worth running. You believed it, not because you are naive, but because the entire cultural infrastructure around you was designed to make you believe it, and it has been running that program on you for decades without your awareness or your consent. The clinical term is effort justification, a cognitive bias rooted in dissonance reduction. The brain compulsively assigns retroactive value to things we have worked hard to obtain, regardless of whether that value is objectively real. This is why people stay in careers that are slowly destroying them, inside companies that will replace them within a quarter of a profit shortfall, defending the choice with the language of commitment and loyalty and work ethic. A study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology showed that participants who performed a painful, tedious task to earn a reward consistently rated that reward as more valuable than those who received the same reward for free. The grind doesn't just tire you out. It tricks you into thinking the tiredness is the point. Neurologically, chronic overwork sustains elevated cortisol, the primary stress hormone, and sustained cortisol systematically impairs the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for long-term planning and rational decision-making. You are working yourself into a cognitive state where you cannot think clearly enough to realize that working this hard may not be the strategy at all. The grind suppresses the exact mental faculty that would allow you to see a better path out. The Economic Policy Institute documented that American worker productivity rose by nearly 350% between 1979 and recent years, while median wages grew by a fraction of that figure. The middle class is working harder than any previous generation and has proportionally less to show for it. Hustle culture is not a grassroots movement born from collective ambition. It is a framing that benefits employers and economic systems requiring maximum output at suppressed wages. You are not lazy when you rest. The person working 18 hours a day is not automatically building anything meaningful. Often they are simply exhausted, and the exhaustion has become the identity they hold up to justify staying inside a system that is taking more than it is giving back. The grind keeps you moving too fast to notice you are going in circles. Impulsive spending. The cart is already full before you knew you needed anything. You opened the app to buy one thing, and somehow, 30 minutes later, you are reading a product description for something you would have called completely unnecessary yesterday, and yet right now it feels essential. It feels like a solution. It feels like the version of yourself you are trying to become. That feeling is not desire. That feeling is engineering. Research in behavioral economics consistently shows that between 40 and 60% of all retail purchases are made with no prior intention whatsoever. A 12-month behavioral study found that impulsive purchasers spent 23% more per month than their own stated budget, a number they consistently underestimated when asked to self-report. The money does not disappear in one dramatic moment. It bleeds out in $15 purchases, discounted bundles, flash sale timers, and frequently bought together algorithms that know your spending psychology better than you know it yourself. The neurochemistry runs through the reward prediction error system. Your brain's dopaminergic circuits are not triggered by pleasure. They are triggered by unexpected positive stimuli. A surprise sale. A product that seems to solve a problem you have been half aware of for months. The algorithm delivering that advertisement has been trained on billions of behavioral data points to find the precise moment in your psychological cycle when that system is at maximum sensitivity, and it targets you exactly there. One-click purchasing removes all payment friction. Countdown timers exploit loss aversion, the documented bias where losing something feels twice as painful as gaining the equivalent. Social proof notifications weaponize your tribal status circuits. Free shipping thresholds are mathematically calibrated to push your cart to a margin-maximizing spend level. Every friction point that might cause you to pause has been identified and surgically removed. What remains is a direct wire from desire to transaction, with every safeguard excised. $50 a week in unplanned purchases is $2,600 a year. Invested at 7% annually over 30 years, that becomes nearly $250,000. Not lost in one dramatic decision, lost in hundreds of quiet, invisible ones. The impulse buy is not the enemy. The habit of impulse buying is the silent guarantee that wealth never accumulates. It doesn't feel like self-sabotage. It feels like living. That is the trap. That is the entire trap. Hype. You didn't just buy the product. You bought the story the product was embedded in. Something activated the moment you saw it announced. Something that felt like excitement but was closer to a manufactured social emergency. A neurological FOMO event constructed with enough precision that your brain registered it as a genuine threat to your standing, your relevance, and your identity within the tribe you belong to. You got in line, or you added it to the cart before it sold out, or you talked about it at the table in a way completely indistinguishable from genuine enthusiasm, because by that point, the line between what you actually wanted and what you had been engineered to want had been entirely dissolved. Hype operates through what economists call informational cascades. A cascade occurs when individuals abandon their own private judgment and follows crowd behavior, because the crowd's behavior signals that everyone else knows something they don't. Nobel laureate Robert Shiller documented this mechanism in asset markets, but the identical mechanics govern consumer culture every single day. When a product is declared sold out, when artificial scarcity is manufactured around a collaboration or a drop, when a cultural moment crystallizes around an object, rational evaluation stops completely. You are no longer asking whether you need this, or whether the price is justified, or whether in 6 months it will be sitting in a clearance bin. You are asking whether you are the kind of person who has this, and what it signals about your social position if you don't. The neurochemistry runs through serotonin, which governs status, belonging, and social rank, not dopamine. In the ancestral environment, low social status meant reduced access to resources and increased vulnerability to group exclusion, which was effectively a death sentence. The brain does not distinguish between a genuine status threat and a marketing campaign precisely engineered to feel like one. The alarm is identical. The spending response is identical. The damage to your net worth is identical. The sneaker resale market alone has been valued at over $10 billion globally, with buyers routinely spending multiples of their discretionary income on items functionally identical to alternatives costing a fraction of the price. The luxury goods industry generates hundreds of billions annually from middle-class aspirational consumers who are, with mathematical certainty, spending down their financial futures to rent a social signal that expires by design every single season. What makes hype uniquely devastating compared to every other trap on this list is that it is entirely socially enforced. Debt is private. The grind is internal. Impulsive spending is often solitary, but hype happens in public, in your feed, in the visible economy of what the people immediately around you are wearing and carrying and consuming. Opting out requires enduring a persistent, low-grade social discomfort that a brain wired by millions of years of evolution to prioritize belonging will resist with everything it has. The hype cycle is not your culture. It is someone's business model, and you are the product being moved through it on a quarterly schedule. These are not personal failures. They are not evidence of weakness, poor discipline, or a lack of financial literacy. Debt traps, the grind, impulse mechanics, and hype cascades are not glitches in the economic system. They are features. They are the deliberate default settings of a consumer economy that requires the middle class to keep spending, keep working, keep borrowing, and keep wanting, because the entire architecture collapses without that behavior. The system does not malfunction when you stay broke. The system is functioning exactly as designed. The only variable the architecture never accounted for was whether you would ever stop long enough to notice it.